Dr. Ferguson, most of us know that the role of the adrenal glands is the fight or flight syndrome, but there's more to it than that. Could you tell us about the role of the adrenal glands?
Yeah, if you look at the adrenal glands, they're composed of two parts, the outer part and the inner part. The outer part is called the cortex, and the inner part is called the medulla. And the outer part produces three sets of hormones, glucocorticoids, mineral corticoids, and androgens. And the inner part produces catecholamines, which are, most people know as epinephrine or adrenaline.
Okay.
So the outer part, so glucocorticoids, that includes cortisol. Cortisol is involved in, yes, you're right, fight or flight, stress response. When we get stressed, our cortisol goes up. And also when we're in the starvation mode, we haven't eaten for a while, our cortisol goes up. Because cortisol, what it does is it has an anti-inflammatory effect, but it also upregulates sugar. And so when we haven't eaten for a while, the cortisol goes up. Our body makes more sugar, but it also somewhat has an effect of breaking down muscle. So over time, if you're chronically stressed, you'll get a redistribution of weight such that you're holding more weight around here and less in your muscles. The mineral corticoids are involved in sodium-potassium balance, which is helpful for having the right amount of fluids in your body, as well as nerve conduction and heart beating and things like that. The androgens are things like testosterone, estrogen, etc., which the reproductive organs produce as well, but for instance for menopausal women, after their ovaries stop producing estrogen, the adrenal glands are the main gland that produces estrogen. So you continue to produce estrogen throughout your life. The catecholamines are also involved in that fight or flight stress response and help upregulate heartbeat and cognition, and just help you get revved up for dealing with that stressful response. Now, depending on, so all those different areas can potentially be dysfunctional. When most people think of the adrenals in the natural health world, they think of adrenal exhaustion. But really, if you're thinking about adrenals, they can be hyperfunctioning or hypofunctioning. Conventionally, hyperfunctioning would be something like Cushing's syndrome, and hypofunctioning would be something like Addison's syndrome. So, and what those refer to is excess cortisol or deficient cortisol. And the deficient cortisol is what's thought of as adrenal exhaustion. And so I like to break down the adrenal syndromes into kind of three different categories. One would be called maladaptive stress syndrome type 1, maladaptive stress syndrome type 2, maladaptive stress syndrome type 3. The first one is excessive catecholamine output. People are agitated, they're nervous, it's more situational. They produce catecholamines and then it comes back down. And those type of people tend to respond well to relaxing things, herbs called nervines that tend to calm a person, relax a person, like valerian, passion flower, hops, that sort of thing. The type 2 maladaptive stress syndrome is excess cortisol production. So these people, this is a very common one, say the high-powered businessman who's been going on hyper mode for a long time. And it's sort of an adaptive response. It works for a while. But what I see with them is they have elevated cortisol levels, and the effect that has is they start to have redistribution of their weight, so they start holding on to more fat. So I see their fat percentages go up. They can have depression, allergies, increased infections, because cortisol has an inhibitory effect on your immune system, and so you tend to get more infections. And these people are treated well, one, by trying to downregulate that cortisol production, but two, by dealing with the side effects of having too much cortisol. So downregulating cortisol would be things like DHEA can modulate that down, which is an androgen hormone. Vitamin C has that effect. Phosphatidylserine makes the receptors more sensitive to cortisol, so your body doesn't need to put out as much. And then to deal with the side effects of too much cortisol, for instance, too much cortisol can lead to more bone breakdown. So you'd want calcium, magnesium, vitamin D on board to prevent osteoporosis. You can have depression with too much cortisol, so something like St. John's wort to help with depression. It can cause insulin resistance due to that, because cortisol tends to upregulate sugar in the blood. So things like chromium that keep the blood sugar more level would be effective. Now the third type is what's usually called adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue, maladaptive stress syndrome type 3. And this can follow the second one from having years of too much cortisol, or it can be its own thing. And so those, when someone is exhausted, they have hypofunctioning of their adrenal glands. They have too little cortisol. And they tend to respond well to things like B vitamins and magnesium to help energy production, as well as adaptogenic type herbs. And these are herbs that have traditionally been used to deal with stress and fatigue and have a modulating effect. And these would be herbs like ginseng, ashwagandha, or otherwise known as withania, rosemary, eleutherococcus, which is called Siberian ginseng. Here in the United States, the ginseng of the Northwest is Oplopanax, which is known as Devil's Club. And those are all can be effective herbs to help adrenal exhaustion. Now they have to be taken for a long time. It's not an overnight fix. Two other herbs that are really effective is licorice and centella or gotu-kola, because both of these herbs have a cortisol sparing effect. In other words, they keep cortisol around longer, and so the body doesn't break it down as quickly. Now, if you have high blood pressure, there can be some issues with licorice, but both of those herbs are pretty effective. And gotu-kola has the added benefit that it also improves memory and mental functioning, as well as it's helpful for building strong collagen and ligaments. And so those can be some effective treatments for the adrenal gland.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.